YouTube? Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be reviewing the Remington 7600. I'm actually at my parents' tonight. I got to babysit their dog. She can't be home by herself more than a few hours, so I'm looking after her. She also does this really cute thing where she pees all over the floor, and she never runs out of pee, so that's that. But we still love her anyway. Don't we? Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. Oh, good girl. We get some birds, huh? We get some birds this year or what? But anyway, I leave most of my guns here at my parents' house, so figured it'd be a good time to do the review. I just gotta make a makeshift studio real quick, and then we'll jump right into the video. Today we're going to be reviewing the Remington 7600 series rifles. I have the Remington 7600 Carbine here with me today, and that just means it has an 18.5-inch barrel instead of a 22-inch barrel that comes standard with the regular 7600. The price of these guns is about $900. You can get a used one for a little bit cheaper, and you can get the Remington 760s, which is the previous version, for a little bit cheaper than that. I have heard that there's been the prices of these guns might be going up because of maybe COVID, or because maybe Remington is switching hands or something and they're worried that these pump action guns might not be produced anymore. I'm not really sure about any of that, so you might have to do some research. But assuming everything is gonna stay the same, these guns come in at about $900. So I've used this gun through one hunting season, and I've really liked it for the specific type of hunting that I do, which is tracking deer up north in the snow, and also for doing small deer drives in southern Maine. So it's basically my brush gun. That's what I use it for, and I think it's one of the best guns, if not the best gun, for that type of hunting, and we'll be going into why in this review. There's definitely some cons with this gun, but I think the pros do outweigh the cons, and that's why I bought the gun. But again, we'll be diving more into that. So the first thing I want to talk about is the pros, what I liked about the gun. So basically, my favorite thing about this gun is a combination of having both speed and reliability. And what I mean by that is, like, a semi-auto is going to be faster, it's going to have the speed, but it's not going to have the same reliability as a pump action. Not much can go wrong with a pump action. It's a pretty simple action. And I've used semi-autos for tracking and for doing small drives, and just getting the needles in the bolt and getting snow and ice in the bolt, there's a chance that it's not going to work in those conditions. So that's why I went with the pump action. A bolt action, on the other hand, has the reliability like a pump action does, but it doesn't have the same speed just because of how the action works. You have to take your hand off the trigger and do the action of the bolt, and then get back on your target, and it just takes way longer than a pump action gun. Lever actions, though, they're pretty similar with having both speed and reliability, like a pump, but I do think the pump has the advantage because you don't have to worry about a hammer. It's got a cross bolt safety, which I think is just a little bit faster and easier to switch off when your fingers get cold. The action is just a little bit faster. With a lever action, it's kind of more awkward. It's not super awkward, but you have to take your finger off the trigger, and you have to push down on the action, and then your whole upper arm and shoulder moves, which just creates a little bit unnecessary. It just creates unnecessary movement. And then, so you're kind of going up and down with your gun. So your follow-up shots are just going to be a little bit, at least in my opinion, they're going to be a little bit harder to get as quick of a follow-up shot. With a pump action, you're really just pulling back in the direction of your shoulder. So you're going straight into your shoulder, and you can kind of lead or follow your target as you're doing that, and then you push forward in the direction of your target. So you're pretty much just staying on that same plane the entire time. So the speed is really there for those follow-up shots, and your finger stays right on the trigger. So at least in my opinion, I think the pump action just has the ultimate advantage when it comes to speed and reliability. And another thing that I really liked about the gun is how well it carries. It does really well, especially with the peep sights that I have, because you can put your hand right over the receiver and the clip, and you're right on the balance point. Like that is like right there, right on the balance point. Gotta put that back in the napkin holder. But anyway, it carries really well because the balance point is so nice. Like your wrist doesn't get cocked forward or back while you're carrying it one-handed for long periods of time. So your wrist doesn't really ever get that tired. I really like that for tracking, because when I'm tracking, I'm carrying my gun one-handed quite a bit. So just to talk about a little bit more about the reliability, I really like that this gun has it's got a little plastic like covering over the bolt. So if I pull this back here, and I go forward a little bit, you can see the bolts up here, but there's this little plastic covering that kind of goes back and forth. And also the bolt's located on the side of the receiver, so stuff can't really fall down in there. And if something was to fall down in there, the little plastic covering here really prevents a lot of stuff from getting in there. So it's really hard for needles to get in there, and any ice or snow, it tends to block that from going in there. So I really like that about the gun. Reliability is key for me. When I'm walking really long distances, the last thing that I want to happen is to not be able to get follow-up shots. So that's why I chose this pump action, and I've been pretty happy with it so far. So another thing I'll touch on is accuracy. I haven't put this gun through any kind of a rigorous accuracy test. I've only ever had peep sights on the gun. So this Williams peep sight that I have on it right now comes with a little bit of a screw-in piece, a screw-in aperture, so it tightens the hole so it's much smaller. Ultimately, that makes it so there's less room for error, so you're more accurate when you're shooting at targets or when you're shooting at whatever. The downside is it's hard to see through, so I really only use it for target practicing. I'll usually use it to sight in my gun. I'll take it out when I hunt, and the only difference is that there's going to be a wider aperture, but it's still going to be sighted in for the center of the peep sight. So anyway, I keep that in for when I sight the gun in, and when I've sighted the gun in, I'm pretty accurate at 50 yards. I can hit a pretty small group at 50 yards with that aperture in there. As soon as I take that aperture out, the spread gets a little bit bigger at 50 yards. Couple inches probably, and I'm not the best shot in the world by any means, but that does get bigger. And then it does get pretty tough, at least for me, to shoot benched off at 100 yards with the aperture taken out. I haven't tried it at 100 yards with the aperture in, but I plan to do that pretty soon. I do think these guns are quite accurate as long as you have like the right sight for what you're doing. So if you plan to use this gun for tree stand hunting or shooting longer ranges, then you might want to scope on the gun, and I'm sure it can handle a couple 100 yards, 200-300 yards, probably no problem. But for what I'm doing, I'm really not shooting further than 60 yards, so the peep sights are what I went with, and so it's plenty accurate for what I do. All right, so now that we've talked about some of the pros with the gun, let's talk about some of the cons, because there was a number of things that I wasn't too happy with the gun, but I'm willing to deal with those things in order to get that speed and reliability that I feel that no other gun on the market really has. And so we'll jump right into those cons. So the first thing is, out of the box, this gun comes with an iron sight that's way up here. Like the rear sight is way up here, and so that's not a very far distance, and so it just feels weird aiming with that so close. And so I put these Williams sights on way back here, much closer to the eye. It goes into the rear portion of where the scope would screw into, and that's perfect. It's almost like having a really small 1-power scope on the back of your gun, so I really like that. Another thing I wasn't too happy with is it's kind of a noisy gun. The first thing that's noisy is the action here. So take it out here, it wiggles, and I'm doing that pretty aggressively, and I can probably tighten the screw up in the front here and it'll be a little bit quieter, but it wiggles back and forth, makes a little bit of noise, so it's not ideal if you've if you're tree stand hunting and trying to get in a position to shoot a deer or something, and it makes that little bit of noise. It's not ideal, but it's manageable. If you just pay attention to it, then you can keep it quiet, but it'd be nice if that was more rock solid. Another thing that's noisy with the gun is the safety. So if I press this right now, you can hear that, super loud. And the safety was actually super hard to press in. I had to go to the gunsmith and get it lightened up a bit, take some pressure out of the spring or whatever they had to do. So now it switches on and off, nice, just like a regular safety. It's just incredibly loud, and that's not ideal if you're gonna be hunting with the gun. But in order to get around this, you can kind of take your fingers and kind of pinch the safety. And as long as you do that, then it's pretty quiet. But ideally, I'd like a safety that's not that loud, but at least for the hunting that I'm doing, the kind of noise that this gun makes isn't really a big deal for me. So I can look past that, no problem. Another thing that I wasn't too happy with was the fit of the gun. It just comes up really bad for me. I'm a pretty tall, lanky guy. And so when I brought the gun up, my face was really squished right into the stock of the gun. So when I would shoot, my thumb would come up and hit me in the nose, and it would hurt pretty bad. And so I knew I had to make a fix. The length of pull with this gun is 13.5 inches. And so what I did was I increased my length of pull from 13.5 to 14.5, because I know that's my length of pull. And so what I ended up doing was buying 2 half-inch spacers, or two 1/4-inch spacers, and then a 1/2 inch rubber butt pad here, a recoil pad. And so that brought me to an extra inch. And so now I'm at a 14.5 inch length of pull, which is perfect for me. And now the gun comes right up to my eye when I pick it up, which is exactly what I'm looking for. So another thing that I wasn't too happy with was how difficult it was to take the gun apart. So I tried to completely take the gun all the way apart by watching a YouTube video. And the YouTube video was pretty good. I was able to follow it along. I had to re-watch it a bunch of times in order to figure it out, but I got it all the way down to the firing pin, and there was a piece that wouldn't come out, so I had to end up bringing it to the gunsmith and have him figuring out, put it back together, and clean the gun. So it is kind of complicated to take the gun apart. It's not a toolless breakdown. If you're just gonna kind of do a basic cleaning, it's not too bad, but if you want to get down into the nitty-gritty, it's pretty confusing, and there's a few pieces in there you got to remember how to put back together. And another thing I did when I was taking the gun apart was the action bars here. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's like to get the firing pin out from the action bars, you had to do some kind of weird twist. I wasn't perfect with it. I was trying to follow the video, and I think I ended up bending these action bars. And so when I got it back from the gunsmith and I tried to use the action by pumping it back and forth a couple times, it was really sticky, and I was kind of disappointed. I was like, what the heck's going on here? So what I ended up doing was, it took me like a minute to figure it out. It was just that these action bars were a little bit warped. And so all I did was I took my fingers and I pinched the action bars and I bent them back into place. It works great now, but it just doesn't give me a whole lot of confidence that these parts are that easy to bend, but I don't really see those bending for any other reason than if I was to take the gun apart. So it's not like a huge deal, but I'd rather it not be so easy to bend, or at least be easier to take apart and put back together, so that way the bending can't really occur. So just to recap on who I think this gun is for, I think it's perfect for someone looking for both speed and reliability in those short to medium ranges. I don't think there's another gun on the market that can do quite as good of a job as this gun can do, despite its flaws. So there you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you got some use out of this review, and I'll see you on the next one.